So I served in a city called Simferopol, which is right in the middle of the Crimean Peninsula. And since my companions and I were the only sisters down there, we kind of had the responsibility to travel all throughout the Crimea to teach any women that wanted to hear more about the church. So the elders in some of the other areas, sometimes they would call us, or we would get referrals from people who lived in different cities, and then we'd hop on a bus and travel out there. But we taught this one woman that we met in Simferopol, and her name was Yasna. And she was very well prepared for the gospel. And within just a few months of when we began teaching her, she was baptized into the church. But she lived out in a tiny little village that was about an hour and a half outside of Simferopol. And her husband was not too fond of the idea that every Sunday she was leaving for a 3-hour round trip to go to church in Simferopol, and then church itself was 3 hours, and so that was 6 hours that she was gone every Sunday. And so eventually he told her that he didn't want her going to church anymore, and we were heartbroken, and she was heartbroken, and it was so hard for everyone. But around that same time, there was a man who lived in a city called Yalta, which is down at the very, very bottom part of the Crimea, and he found out about the church, and he was baptized, and his wife and his son were baptized, and he started bringing his friends into the church. And all of a sudden, down in Yalta, there was this huge, huge movement of people who were joining the church very quickly. It was a miracle to see. Well, one day, my companion and I went out to teach Yasna. We wanted to keep giving her recent convert lessons, even though her husband wasn't letting her come to church, because we wanted her to have spiritual support through that period of time. And she told us that her father-in-law, her husband's dad, had just been given a copy of the Book of Mormon by someone. And we thought, oh, well, did he meet the missionaries in Simferopol or something? How did this happen? And she said, no, he has a friend named Alexei, and he came and gave him the Book of Mormon and told him about the church. And as soon as she said his name was Alexei, I knew who it was. It was the man from Yalta who had joined the church and started the big movement out there. Turns out that he and Yasna's father-in-law had been friends for like 30 years. And because of that, Yasna's husband was willing to let her start attending church down in Yalta. And so we were able to go with her for the second ever church meeting that was held in Yalta. And that was a miracle to see all these recent converts who were starting a little group, which is one step smaller than a branch. And it was amazing to see how the Lord had really prepared Yasna's family, because Yasna was so readily accepted the gospel. And then her father-in-law's best friend for years accepted it, and that started to soften the hearts of the rest of her family. And before I left, we were able to teach her mother-in-law and her brother-in-law, and her husband still wasn't terribly interested, but even he was starting to warm up to it a little bit. And then I left, I came home. But it was such a miracle to see not only how the church was growing so rapidly down in Yalta and in these tiny little villages that were around, but also to see how the Lord had connected people in such a way that they would be able to have support in the church and kind of have that fellowship that's so central to the purpose of the church, when people get to meet together and to commune with each other and kind of support and strengthen and fellowship each other.